Hello, everyone. So, this is my video response to the connecting the dots information we learned this week. All right, so this is asking about when a learner activates prior knowledge, what's actually happening to the brain. So, we learned that there's different nodes of the brain, and when you introduce old ideas and new ideas, you're bridging and creating connections between them. We're really trying to access our long term memory, pull from it, and relate it to new information. And then, how my teachers best organize their lessons to support students in seeing connections between already learned and old concepts. So Fletcher Wood said that teachers organize their lessons to support students in seeing connections by ensuring that their flexible knowledge is available and ready to be accessed, by identifying organizational structures and knowledge and teaching students how to use those structures. So, one, we have to make sure there's structures in place. Two, we have to make sure they know those structures exist and then teach them how to use them. So, it's a three-step process. And if you miss a step, they're not really pulling from long term memory to get into working memory. And then once you're using your working memory, that also becomes some long term memory just with your added skill in addition to one that already existed. What happens if teachers do not intentionally activate relevant prior knowledge? Well, if they don't do that, they're not making the connections necessary. So they're not able to help with their working memory, which means it's not going to become long term memory and it's not going to be helpful. They can create misunderstandings, they can incorrectly apply the wrong prior knowledge, not what is intentional. So teachers have to make sure, and we'll talk about this in later questions, that questions they're asking are very intentional so that there is not any sort of misunderstanding, misrepresentation happening because they're pulling from the wrong information. How does connecting background knowledge help support learning? It helps them make sense of new content. We're introducing something fresh but relatable to what they already know. It's a foundation. I think I answered this later. It's a foundation. We're just adding on to it. So you're more likely to understand something new if it links to something you already know. If it creates a spark of something like, oh, this is familiar, then you're more likely to retain it. How can they help support students with their background knowledge? Again, this is the questions we have to ask have to be very intentional and purposeful. We want them to make explicit connections. We don't want to have generalizations with the old knowledge and the new knowledge. I probably skipped it, but there was something in here about talking about when students pull naturally without a teacher's influence from prior knowledge, they're going to pull from the thing that is the strongest in their memory, the thing maybe that's the most recent, but regardless, the most memorable to them. That's not always the thing we want them to be making a connection with. It may not be the most applicable thing they're making connection with. It's just something that resonates with them. That resonation might not always be spot on. If they activate, yes. What if students activate irrelevant or incorrect prior knowledge? They pick that thing that is most front and center in their mind, but it's not necessarily what a teacher would like them to understand because it creates maybe a generalization or an inaccuracy. Well, they're not getting help with their limited working memory in processing the new information. They can process it incorrectly. They're less likely to remember it and apply it correctly in the future, and their encoding is not going to be appropriate. And then why is it so important that teachers prompt students to activate relevant prior knowledge before learning new concepts? Again, we want something to be relatable to them in their lives. If they already have a foundation, they already have an understanding, we can just keep building the house on top of that instead of having to lay down a new structure every time. That's a waste. Learning's ongoing, it is spiraled, it's cyclical. So we want to, one, reinforce the previous knowledge. So we're activating that to help us now, but also to reinforce what we already know. We don't want them to lose that information that they've already retained as a long-term memory. We want to refresh it, reapply it. And then they're going to make the connections with the new material. Pardon her. And they're more likely to assist with acquisition or retention if we use a replier knowledge. So again, we're just attaching something existing to something new. They're going to carry each other into long-term memory if it's done correctly, if the relevant connections have been made and not just the ones that are most easily applied.